éléments clés vraiment d'une réponse africaine. Et nous avons pensé qu'il est très, très important que nous, en tant qu'Africains, réfléchissons, que nous regardons notre continent, que nous le regardons, certes avec des experts venant d'autres continents, mais vu le nombre d'experts africains qu'il y a aujourd'hui, nous avons estimé qu'il est important de travailler aussi avec des experts africains. So we are going to discuss this afternoon on the war in Ukraine and the need for a functional state in Africa. We do not have simultaneous translation, so it will be important. We will try to translate as we go along. We will try to use the other language when we are visualizing in one. Please do intervene either in the chat or by raising your hand if you feel like you need a specific point of translation. All of our experts are bilingual, so we will be able to hear from them in both languages. So with that short introduction, at strategies, I will go ahead and get started. Strategies, we started this round of discussions on Africa's responses to the consequences of the war in Ukraine last month. Last month, we focused on perspectives and key responses for food security in Africa. Today, we are going to look at the responses at a political and security level. We're going to sort of take stock of where we are and then look at the responses at a political and security level. And then at strategies, we are working on a concept called functional states, because in our mind, there cannot be a response to these multiple crises without functional African states. So our third round of discussions will be on that concept of functional states. So today we'll look at the war in Ukraine and the impact on Central Africa and specifically the Central African Republic. We will look at the impact on the security and political dynamics in West Africa. And we will look at responses, peace-building responses. In our mind and through our work at strategies, we have realized that, yes, of course, the big geopolitical strategies are important. The top-down strategies are important. But very often missing from the discussion are the grassroots approaches to conflict resolution, and conflict happens at the grassroots. So we will be discussing on approaches and how they are being developed already in Africa. So that will be our three-part discussion. And the way the discussion will be structured, we're going to give a little introduction just to situate ourselves on the trends ongoing right now on the continent that have been developed by strategies. Then we will give the opportunity to our three experts to give us various perspectives, and then we will open up for discussion. And we will close out with a small session on functional states. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat at all times. Please feel free to exchange in the chat at all times. And for those of you who are watching either on Facebook or on YouTube, please do feel free to put your questions in those chats as well. We have people who are watching all of the chats on all of the channels, and we'll be able to bring your questions to the discussion table with our experts. So our three experts today are Hans de Marie Hengu, who is a senior analyst for the International Crisis Group, and he focuses on Central Africa. He's based in Nairobi, Kenya. Amina Julte. Amina is a history lecturer and researcher from the University of Ngaoundere, and she does amazing work on grassroots approaches to conflict resolution. I think we're going to hear a little bit about them today. Gilles Yabi is a political analyst and holds a PhD in development economics. He is the founder and chairman of WATI, the West African Citizen Think Tank. And it is not my fault that all of these people are Cameroonian. As you can see, they're coming from all over Africa, but they happen to be Cameroonian, and luckily for all of us, quite bilingual. So we'll be able to have the discussion in both languages. And we will be introducing them a little bit more in depth in just a minute as they take the floor. But right now, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Baba Dodo from Strategies, to give us an overall view of the key trends on peace and security in Africa in this situation 2 months after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Baba?
Thank you very much, Ka, for giving me the floor to give an overview of the situation today, 2 months after the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And in this presentation, I'm just going to share with you the key trends on peace and security in Africa related to the war in Ukraine. So this presentation will be done in 3 key points. The first one is regarding the situation in Africa before the war in Ukraine. And we will see how Africa was already in a crisis situation. And then we will move to the consequences on the continent that are due to the war in Ukraine. And we will see how these are affecting the continent. And we will, at the end, see the way that the war in Ukraine is within a major situation, which is the Russian offensive in Africa. So let's begin with the situation before the war. And as you see on the next slide, the map on your right side shows how on the continent we were already in a crisis situation. In yellow, you see all the countries that were already in a crisis situation. In the orange color, they are in an emergency situation, and the red zones are in Nigeria and South Sudan, the places where there was already a catastrophe. And between 2020 and 2021, we see that due to COVID-19, the global food prices have been rising due to the disruption of global supply chains, the transportation costs, the port disruptions. And this is almost 300 million people that were facing hunger since 2021. This corresponds to an increase of almost 50 million people compared to the year before, 2019. And we can see that most of them are in the Eastern Africa, where there are almost 50% of people undernourished. And in Western and Central Africa, there we have almost 20% of people, and the Northern and Southern Africa are less affected. So this is a map. This is like a map of the situation before the war in Ukraine. And next slide. We will see that this was already in addition to key pre-existing challenges that did not improve in 2021. First of all, we had the conflict. We had instability with a lot of coups. We had the limited access to basic services for citizens, such as water, access to electricity, access to a good education and healthcare, and also a very high rate of people living without any job. I mean, the young people. So this was already the situation before the COVID-19, and we see how Africa was already in a very, very crisis situation. Now let's go let's move forward and see how the war in Ukraine has affected Africa. This is only 2 months after the start of the beginning of the war. This map shows the vulnerability situation and the food security risk on this is like the global map. And we see that Africa is the most affected continent within the global south. And you see all the orange countries, all the countries with the orange color that shows the high vulnerability with large increase in food costs compared to the GDP expected. And we see that this is already affecting the continent a lot. Let's move to the next slide. And we will see that this war in Ukraine is actually happening in a global context of a major Russian offensive in Africa, which is in the next slide, seen through the significant presence of Russia on the continent in key 4 areas. The first one is the military cooperation and the sale of arms. The second area is the natural resources, where we see how there's a huge consolidation of Russia-Africa relations. The third area is the trade between Russia and African states with an increasing volume of trade. And the fourth area is the multilateral institutions that are providing very big avenues for Russia, which is strengthening its political influence on the continent. And you can see on the map on the left side that countries like Egypt, Algeria, Nigeria, Sudan, Zambia, South Africa, Rwanda are countries where the Russians are really present, increasing their influence on the continent. And this is not only the situation where we see Russia improving its influence on the continent. It is also through the mercenaries. We see that out of 54 countries, the private military company Wagner is reportedly present in 16 countries, which are Libya, Chad, Madagascar, Mozambique, Botswana, Burundi, the DRC, Congo, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Guinea-Bissau. So we see that through the public and the private sector, the Russians are really taking control over the continent. And this is not only something which is due to their good work, but according to the Center for Strategic Studies, Russia has carried out a model of disinformation to gain political influence in Africa. And between 2014 and the early 2022, studies have documented at least 16 campaigns conducted for the benefits of Russians in Africa. And the consequences are what you can see in the next slides, with this polling on Putin with specific questions such as, do you approve or disapprove the Russian actions in Ukraine? And you can see that there are those who approve are coming from countries such as Mali, where we know that Wagner is present, Ivory Coast, Uganda, but in countries like South Africa, there's a strong disapproval. There's another question like, how important of an economic partner is Russia for your country growth and development? And you see that in countries like Mali, Kenya, this is the Russian position is very well appreciated, whereas in other countries like Nigeria, Uganda, it's not really. The next slide. So we see that Russia presents a viable alternative to the prevailing anti-Western resentment through this information action that they are carrying out. There is a question like, who do you think is the most responsible for the military action in Ukraine? In Mali, Ivory Coast, or Uganda, for instance, this is the NATO responsibility, whereas in South Africa, people are like either thinking that it's Russia, or they are either not sure, or they think this could be the responsibility of someone else. And the last question, who is the most reliable security partner to fight against terrorism in your country? You still see that in Mali, Ivory Coast, Russia, where Wagner is present, is considered to be the most reliable security partner. And this is basically through the disinformation, this propaganda that they are faking, that they are carrying out on the social media. So this is just to show how Russia is actually in huge push to increase its influence on the continent. Let's move forward with the next slides, where we will see what are the responses that some African countries have developed against or to mitigate the consequences of the war in Ukraine. We have at least 5 key areas. The first one is on the political level, where we see that there's a call for ceasefire by the African Union and its commission, and for the opening of political negotiations. We also see that on the humanitarian front, African countries are pulling their efforts to rescue their nationals stranded in Ukraine. We've seen that with the Egyptian embassy that announced on its Facebook page that it was setting up coordination and evacuation activities for its nationals to Poland and Romania, and a lot of African countries did the same. On the economic front, the AU integration into the farm initiative to alleviate the food crisis in Africa is actually ongoing, and the AU chairpersons call to international partners for a reallocation of special drawing rights from rich countries to Africa. And finally, on the diplomatic front, we had a declaration of the 28th of February 2002 in Addis Ababa by the AU president and the chairperson of the commission, calling on all countries to respect international law and foreign. What the continent is actually doing at the level of the AU and its commissions. The slide will show us what is actually being done at the level of some countries. Next slide. Yes, here we see that taking a look at the regional representations on the continent, countries are kind of taking different measures. Like in North Africa, there's a turn to other suppliers to import with the case of Egypt. In West Africa, we see that Benin has put in place a set of measures to tackle the inflationary crisis. In Central Africa, the case of Cameroon, for instance, where military cooperation agreements were signed between we have a signing of gas supply agreements with Italy. This is the case of Angola and Mozambique. And in East Africa, due to difficulties in exporting tea and flowers to Russia, a country like Kenya decided to find other potential buyers to reduce the stockpile. This is to have a view on at the regional level. But let's go now to the next slide where we will see that we also
I have lost the sound from Baba. Can others hear him?
Yes.
You can hear
him as well.
Okay. And I feel like he has dropped off completely. Let me just say that I think this was his final slide. Baba, are you
I'm still
there?
here. I'm using a backup.
Okay, please go ahead to wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah, just to wrap up, I was saying that we have some group of countries like the great powers where we have Egypt and South Africa who are like taking advantage of the current crisis to export more energy with the aim of offsetting the additional cost of rising food prices by taking advantage of the gains made on exports. We have countries that are dependent.
Recording in progress.
That are dependent on Russian. On Russian and Ukrainian wheat and fertilizers, like Egypt, Algeria, Nigeria, Morocco. What they try to do is establish an agricultural fertilizer manufacturing plant in Nigeria. So they're kind of looking for solutions, alternative solutions to the situation. And other countries like those importing oil, what they try to do is just to keep prices on oil products fixed so that they can protect their households' purchasing power. And they also provide subsidies to support their citizens. So this is what we see as responses on the continent. Now let's move forward to conclude this overview of the situation.
Hello, Ka, could we move to the next slide? Okay, thank you. Now with this, I'm going to direct these questions to you and to our fellow speakers. How will the conflict in Ukraine affect peace and security in Africa in the short, medium, and long term? And what should African states and forces do to take advantage of these situations? This is just like to trigger the discussion and have some food for thought in this conversation this afternoon. Okay, thank you, Ka.
Thank you, Baba. Thank you very much for
now I'm handing back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that overview and for these final questions. I'm going to go straight away to our first expert, Mr. Hans de Marie Hengoep. Mr. Hans de Marie is Central Africa Senior Analyst for International Crisis Group. He has worked on both Cameroon and the Central African Republic, and is of course involved at all levels with the national government, with international institutions, with various platforms in proposing policy initiatives with regard to conflict resolution. Hans de Marie, I am just going to hand over to you. How is this conflict impacting the situation in CAR? CAR is one of the places where we saw demonstrations supporting Russia at the very beginning of the invasion. How is this war impacting, and yeah, what are some of the consequences for CAR and the continent?
Thank you, Kawala, for giving me the floor, and thanks for the invitation. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are located. I will start by apologizing because I have a kind of horrible noise background. I changed office to come to the conference room, hoping that it could at least reduce so that you can listen to me easily. Indeed, I was proposed to discuss the possible consequences of the war in Ukraine or Russian engagement in Central Africa, and particularly Central African Republic, and possible lessons learned and learned from those countries and from the Central African Republic government particularly. Let's start quickly by having a kind of summary of how Russia became that strong in Central African Republic. Russia literally exploited a vacuum left by France after Operation Sangaris. For those who are following the country, it was an operation designed by France, helping to stabilize the government in Bangui after the coup of the Seleka rebellion in March 2013. So when Sangaris arrived, when President Touadéra, who is the current president, arrived in power in 2016, it was at the same time that Operation Sangaris of France left the country. And at that time, I recall that President Touadéra had asked France to keep the operation in place because he was saying, I almost do not have a functional army and security apparatus, and I have more than 10,000 rebels who control the 2/3 of the country, and without Sangaris operation, I fear for my power, and I suspect that perhaps the MINUSCA, which is the UN force in the country, will not be able to protect me. But France still left the country, and therefore President Ouattara started to find an ally, someone who could protect him, and easily he found Russia. But even for Russia, it was not something so immediate. There was one incident that happened in Somalia, along the Somalia coast. Some weapons seized from the Al-Shabaab jihadi organizations, around 2,000 Kalashnikov. France had proposed to hand over those weapons to Central African Republic, given the country was complaining lack of weapons, ammunition to fight against the rebels, and they were also complaining of the UN arms embargo against the country. So Russia at that time blocked that maneuver at the UN Security Council, and when the president of Central African Republic, Touadéra, complained and approached the president of France to ask why is it that finally the operation or the maneuver could not happen, he was asked to find the answer near Russia, and then he traveled for the first time to Russia, met the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Lavrov, and finally the president of Russia, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs finally ending up asking him, what is in fact really the problem in your country? And then he told me that we need weapons to fight against the rebel. And then the Russia answered him, well, in that case, it's not just those 2,000 Kalashnikov that we can provide, can certainly provide much more than that. That's how the first partnership, a military agreement was signed between the two countries, and gradually from instructors that were officially deployed in the country and under the control of the Ministry of Defense of Russia, paramilitary from the PMC, the private military companies that starting being deployed until they reached the maximum of 2,000 after the crisis of December 2020. As you probably know, a bunch of rebels groups decided to form a coalition called CPC with the aim to prevent the presidential and legislative election and topple President Touadéra. And facing that, Touadéra once more relied on Russia, of course, alongside the UN force, the Rwandan forces, but rely on Russia substantially to repel this coup attempt and consolidate his power. So that is more or less the background of Russian presence in Central African Republic, which presence even before the Ukraine war has got some advantages for the current administration, Touadéra administration, but also some inconveniences. One of it being the very difficult and tense relations, even before the Ukraine war, between Touadéra administration and the UN in the country, on the one hand, and between Touadéra administration and the Western partners in general, who had already started to threaten to cut budget support, humanitarian or development aid, not humanitarian, but development aid, to the point that, which is kind of worrying for a country which is significantly relying on the budget support. If you compare to other countries in Africa, is probably the country with the most exposure to budget support. The national budget of the country is, I think, around 455 million euros, with nearly half of it directly coming from the World Bank, IMF, and the European Union, and to a lesser extent, France, which contribute to around 10% on that budget. So tense relationship, but also what we could describe as a sort of authoritarian development in the way the country is governed, because with the support of Russians, the president felt less inclined or compelled to discuss and negotiate with the political opposition or civil society. And we have seen more and more measures restricting the liberties, the political liberties and political freedom in the country. And likewise, we saw that the president was less inclined in meaningful and substantial discussion with the rebel coalition, persuaded that with the support of the Russian, we'll probably manage to defeat them. So in few sentences, what I could say is that one could not reject or deny the participation of the Russians, PMC, Wagner, in how they have managed to avoid the power of Touadéra to fall. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the same PMC has significantly contributed to expel the rebel groups in most of the towns and cities in Central African Republic, from Bangui to Bosangoa to Bambari to Priya to Birao. In many of those places, except Bangui, of course, armed groups used to have either a direct or an indirect control. Nowadays, in Bosangoa, in Bambari, and in many of those cities, Power, you will not see arms groups. Arms groups have been expelled in the rural areas, which does not mean that they have been defeated or that they are no longer in capacity to mount a rebellion, but at least those capacities have been to a certain extent reduced. And the ordinary Central Africans from the capital, some of them are proud that for once it's not the armed groups that are in control in those main cities, even if some observers rightly pointed that in somehow a predator could have been replaced by another type of predator. So that's what I will say. Now, what are the consequences of the war in Ukraine in Central African Republic? The first consequence I will say is that it has worsened the ties or the relationship between the Syria government and the Western partners. As I said earlier, those relationships were already in a very difficult situation, under strain. But with the war in Ukraine, a new step. I mean, it has reached a new step in his negative side. And some evidence or some example showing that is you probably have followed or you are probably aware that over the past 2 or 3 weeks, different financial institutions have decided to cut the budget support. Some had done that already a month ago. Others had just suspended, saying that they are going to see how the country is going to improve the governance of different parts. But in fact, we know that the issue of Wagner and Russia is the main reason, even if the governance and human rights issues are the one publicly used by those partners. But following that, the Minister of Finance, Ervin Doba, has declared a couple of weeks ago that he believes that the country may have to cut the budget of several ministries from 40 to 60%, which is huge. So if you can just try to represent yourself, 40 to 60% of the budget of several ministry cuts due to that. It is a serious blow, and it could have a social repercussion for the stability of the state as well. Because if, let's say, between July to January, because some are saying that it could start in July, others say it could be in January 2023. If in one of those dates we reach the situation where the Central African government is no longer in capacity to pay the salaries of the civil servants, there are dozens of thousands of civil servants in the country, or of the more than 10,000 people that belongs to the military and security apparatus, we could face a sort of social uprising in the country, and even, an unpredictable reaction from the military. For those who know the story of the country or the history of the country, at least 2 military coups in the past were perpetrated because of cutting of the salaries of the militaries or non-payment the salary of the militaries. Another obvious consequence is the one already highlighted, the surge of price in the country. But that one is very difficult to exactly figure out why, because as it was rightly pointed, there was already inflation in the country since COVID. There was a second wave of inflation starting after the rebel coalition CPC strangulation of the capital. When they decided to block the corridor between Garabulai and Bangui, there was a second wave of inflation. So it's difficult to really measure what is the immediate consequence of the war in Ukraine, and the fact that Cameroon decided to not export certain type of goods on which CAR rely heavily. Just a reminder that CAR is a landlocked country with no access to the sea or to the oceans, and therefore significantly relying on Cameroon for all kinds of supplies, food supplies. So those are the type of consequences. And perhaps the third and last one, in terms of consequences, but it's more also consequences for Russia, is about the limited capacity of Russian projection in the Central Africa region. Just in one word, then I will stop there, since I realize that I've used my time. One of the reasons why Russia deploy so heavily in Central African Republic is not just for mineral resources and all the usual things usually used as, which are rightly, but I don't think is the main reason. I mean, there's also Russia was also thinking about first strengthening its leverage in diplomatic negotiation with France and the Western partners, including in issues related to Ukraine and the Eastern Europe in general. But there was also a maneuver with the aim to seduce some Central African region head of state, showing them that Russia could, replace France in providing securities, being like the main giant, stabilizing their country. So with what is happening in Ukraine and the position of Russia in the Central African Republic now, perhaps some of those countries or some of those head of state who were already seduced by Russia could revise their position, while conversely, others like the Cameroonian president could think that, well, if I do want to organize a presidential succession, which will not be democratic, is perhaps the time to change my main allies and use Russia now. I will not say in exchange of France, because it's not the same in Cameroon. I mean, it's not the case in Cameroon where the country is relying on many actors, but at least using Russia as the most important among the allies now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hans de Marie. I imagine that we could stay on CAR for 2 hours and there would still be things left to say. But you're describing a very, very complex situation where CAR before the Ukraine war had already established a very strong relationship with Russia, maybe one of the strongest on the continent, with benefits on the security level, but a lot of strong weaknesses as well in terms of respect of human rights, authoritarian developments from the ruling government in Bangui, and not dealing with the conflict from the base in terms of dialogue and actually negotiating peace with the various actors. Let me go over to the Sahel, where we see there is a very big seduction game going on right now between Russia and several of the Sahel countries. Gilles Yabi, I had already I had already adopted Gilles into Cameroon. He noted in the chat that he's not Cameroonian, which is a good thing because we wanted the discussion to have experts from everywhere. He is Beninois, based in Senegal, and doing a lot of work on the Sahel and the countries, the security situation and political situation in those countries. Mr. Yabi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kawala. I hope that you can hear me clearly. And yes, given that I'm not really Cameroonian, even if I'm very close to Cameroon, I might actually speak in French if you allow me, and if you know, some of the participants don't find it difficult to follow in French. So just let me know. I can do it in English, but I think it will be easier for me to speak in French, and so that I can keep to the time.
Okay. Go ahead in French, and yeah, and we'll do a summary or ask questions in English, since your English is also very good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Madame Kawala, pour l'invitation et au cabinet stratégie. Et je suis ravi aussi de retrouver Hans de Marie, mon ancien collègue à International Crisis Group. Et je salue Christelle Amina depuis Ngaoundéré, que je rencontre avec plaisir également. Merci pour l'invitation. Alors, je vais essayer d'être aussi précis que possible avec quelques observations, mais en même temps des observations plutôt générales. Je ne serai pas aussi détaillé que Hans sur la République centrafricaine, parce que je pense que le sujet qui nous occupe sur les implications politiques et sécuritaires de la guerre en Ukraine pour le continent, je pense qu'il faut peut-être partir d'abord du conflit lui-même en cours. Et je vais donc faire, je pense, probablement 5 observations très rapidement. La première, ce serait justement sur le conflit en cours et le fait qu'on a énormément d'incertitudes. Incertitudes sur sa durée. Très clairement, on est parti pour un conflit de plus longue durée peut-être qu'on ne le pensait au début, donc en Ukraine. Deuxièmement, sur son intensité. On ne sait pas comment est-ce que le conflit lui-même va évoluer, avec évidemment les livraisons d'armes de part et d'autre. On est dans une logique très clairement, en tout cas pour l'OTAN et le bloc occidental, de faire en sorte que la Russie ne puisse pas gagner militairement la guerre en Ukraine. Ce qui veut dire à nouveau la possibilité d'un conflit sur la durée. Et troisième incertitude, on ne sait pas dans quel état est-ce que les parties engagées directement dans ce conflit sortiront de ce conflit. Qui se sera le plus affaibli? Parce que je ne suis pas sûr qu'au fond, on en sorte gagnant, qu'il y ait une partie qui en sorte gagnante, mais la question, c'est qui sera plus affaibli que l'autre entre la Russie et ses adversaires, notamment occidentaux. Ces éléments sont importants parce qu'au fond, ça veut dire aussi que les impacts, il faut les envisager à court, à moyen et même à long terme, parce que les implications géopolitiques, je crois, du conflit en cours sont énormes. On le voit déjà en Europe, on le voit avec l'adhésion ou la demande d'adhésion de la Suède et de la Finlande, on le voit avec la course aux armements en Europe et une course aux armements qui va être mondiale. Donc, première observation pour dire, à mon avis, qu'il faut qu'en Afrique, on suive la guerre elle-même et qu'on essaie d'en anticiper les implications, y compris celles qui ne sont pas les plus immédiates et les plus évidentes. Deuxième observation, je crois que s'il y a une certitude déjà, c'est qu'on est dans une situation d'extrême polarisation et qu'on va probablement rester dans une situation d'antagonisme et donc de polarisation très forte entre la Russie d'un côté et l'Occident de l'autre. Je crois que dans ce type de situation, les plus faibles quand même sont les plus vulnérables, puisque les puissances, qu'elles soient grandes ou moyennes, ont tendance à se battre par proxy, c'est-à-dire en utilisant des intermédiaires et des pays intermédiaires. Et donc cette rivalité entre d'un côté la Russie et ses alliés et de l'autre côté l'Occident et ses alliés, je ne vois pas très bien, en tout cas, en quoi elle pourrait être positive pour le continent africain. Je crois que la présentation initiale du cabinet montrait qu'on avait déjà des situations de crises très complexes et très nombreuses sur le continent. Donc, antagonisme et aggravation finalement des crises politiques et sécuritaires existantes. Et ça, je vais l'illustrer par le cas du Mali, et ce sera donc mon troisième point. La crise, évidemment, est déjà très vieille au Mali. Ça fait plus de 10 ans maintenant qu'on est dans une situation extrêmement complexe. Crise au nord, groupes armés terroristes, mais évidemment, n'oublions pas qu'il y a d'autres groupes armés qui ne sont pas des groupes terroristes et qui sont plutôt au départ des groupes, disons, Touaregs qui revendiquaient l'indépendance, et un déplacement de ce conflit vers le centre et ensuite vers les frontières et un débordement vers les pays voisins. Donc, on est dans le cas d'une crise au Sahel qui est extrêmement complexe et où en 10 ans, malgré les interventions internationales et notamment françaises, militairement, on n'a pas une amélioration de la situation. Ce qui a d'ailleurs créé aussi les conditions psychologiques pour que les populations estiment finalement que faire appel à la Russie, notamment un autre partenaire pour la sécurité et la réponse militaire, pouvait tout à fait se justifier, compte tenu à nouveau de l'incapacité collective à répondre aux défis sécuritaires au cours des dernières années. Et ça a été un argument, je pense, majeur pour les auteurs du coup d'État au Mali. Le Mali, c'est aussi le cas en Afrique de l'Ouest, clairement, d'un basculement stratégique assumé. Très clairement, l'équipe actuelle de transition fait de la Russie son partenaire principal. Avec encore une ambiguïté sur le groupe Wagner. Comme vous le savez, l'existence n'est pas reconnue par les autorités russes. Par contre, les autorités russes reconnaissent l'existence de contrats entre des intérêts russes privés et le gouvernement malien. Et de l'autre côté, le gouvernement malien continue à nier l'existence, disons, de contractualisation avec un groupe privé et met en avant la coopération officielle avec la Russie. Ce qui est clair, on le sait, notamment l'équipe de transition et les colonels au pouvoir, en particulier le ministre de la Défense, ont des relations très poussées avec la Russie, ce qui se traduit notamment par des livraisons d'équipements militaires, d'hélicoptères, etc. Donc, avec le basculement stratégique en faveur de la Russie au Mali, on a clairement, au fond, un gain en termes, en tout cas, d'équipement de l'armée et clairement de soldats ou de mercenaires, à nouveau soldats / mercenaires, engagés sur le terrain à côté des forces maliennes. Mais je pense que si, évidemment, on avait déjà une tension, on avait une crise multiforme au Mali et des conflits avec notamment la France et les Occidentaux, très clairement, c'est l'arrivée présumée de Wagner et le basculement à nouveau en faveur de la Russie qui a été un élément majeur du degré de crispation aujourd'hui entre le Mali et la France. Vous avez sans doute suivi les derniers développements, disons renonciation, enfin répudiation des accords de défense, mais aussi aujourd'hui accusation de la France qui serait derrière un coup d'État, une tentative de coup d'État, de complot qui aurait été déjouée il y a quelques jours au Mali. Cela montre à nouveau l'intensité de la polarisation et le fait que la guerre en Ukraine ne peut que renforcer aujourd'hui cette rivalité, cette polarisation, cet antagonisme. Et là encore, c'est difficile de voir en quoi un pays comme le Mali, avec ses nombreuses crises, ses nombreuses fragilités, pourrait réellement bénéficier de cette tension. Toujours sur le Mali, sur l'efficacité opérationnelle, parce qu'évidemment, l'une des questions sur l'impact immédiat sur la sécurité et notamment la lutte contre le terrorisme, c'est au fond, est-ce que l'alignement, le recours à la Russie est éventuellement assez supplétif, permet d'être plus efficace dans la guerre contre les groupes armés terroristes. J'aime pas beaucoup parler de guerre contre le terrorisme, mais contre des groupes armés qui utilisent des méthodes terroristes. Est-ce qu'on a des éléments qui plaident en faveur aujourd'hui d'une efficacité de cette alliance? Je crois qu'il est trop tôt pour le dire. Très clairement, on a une attitude beaucoup plus offensive depuis que la Russie est vraiment sur le terrain et que des Russes sont engagés aux côtés des forces maliennes. On a sans doute un bilan plus élevé potentiellement d'éléments des groupes armés tués dans le centre du Mali. Mais malheureusement, on ne sait pas très bien si tous ceux qui sont tués sont vraiment des membres des groupes ou étaient des membres des groupes terroristes ou si on est dans une forme de nettoyage qui s'est traduit par des actions contre des populations civiles qui se trouvent être dans les mêmes lieux que les groupes armés terroristes. Vous avez tous entendu parler sans doute des événements de Moura au centre du Mali et de la possibilité que des centaines de personnes aient été tuées. Moi, je suis très prudent sur cette question parce qu'au fond, le vrai problème qu'on a aujourd'hui au Mali, c'est un problème d'information, d'accès à l'information et d'accès à une bonne information dans un contexte de désinformation croisée par tout le monde. Donc, on utilise évidemment du côté malien, on utilise tous les faits possibles pour incriminer notamment la France. Et inversement, côté français, on a aussi tout à fait la possibilité finalement de s'écarter des faits, de ne pas tellement s'intéresser aux faits, mais de s'intéresser surtout à la dénonciation, disons, des actions de l'armée malienne et donc des autorités maliennes actuelles. Quatrième, je pense qu'on en est à la quatrième observation et avant-dernière, puisque à nouveau, on n'a pas beaucoup de temps. En élargissant un peu, je crois qu'il y a une question qu'il faut se poser à moyen terme cette fois-ci, c'est regarder quand même les faits et le poids de la Russie aujourd'hui dans le monde. Parce que se poser les questions sur comment est-ce que les partis s'en sortiront, c'est au fond être aussi un peu cynique côté africain et ne pas vouloir être du côté de la partie qui va être la plus affaiblie. À nouveau, on ne peut pas dire aujourd'hui si la Russie sortira extrêmement affaiblie, mais je crois que lorsqu'on regarde quand même en termes de potentiel, la Russie, ce qu'elle a à offrir fondamentalement, c'est d'abord dans le secteur de la défense, les armements, les ventes d'armes. Je pense que Hans l'a montré tout à l'heure. C'est quand même un axe majeur de la coopération avec les pays africains. Le deuxième axe majeur, c'est les mines. Ce n'est pas le secteur, disons, c'est un secteur important, bien sûr, mais ce n'est pas celui où il y a le plus de possibilités aujourd'hui de répondre aux défis importants du continent à moyen et à long terme. Mais globalement, la Russie ne fait pas partie des 10 économies les plus importantes dans le monde. Et je crois qu'évidemment, si on était dans une confrontation avec la Chine, on serait dans une dynamique totalement différente. Donc, je crois qu'il faut aussi se poser les questions sur l'alignement possible aujourd'hui avec la Russie. Elle n'est peut-être pas isolée parce qu'elle n'est pas condamnée par la puissance chinoise et d'autres, mais je crois que lorsqu'on regarde le premier vote à l'Assemblée générale, il y a quand même pas non plus beaucoup de pays qui approuvent en tout cas le principe de l'intervention de l'Ukraine, qui est une invasion de l'Ukraine donc par la Russie. Et je vais terminer, pour ne pas être trop long, sur un dernier point qui me semble être important, puisqu'on parle de perspectives politiques et sécuritaires. On doit penser à l'articulation des défis que nous avons sur le continent et dans le Sahel et en Afrique de l'Ouest. Et la question aujourd'hui du choix politique, de modèle politique. Avec la Russie, on a évidemment un modèle politique qui n'est quand même pas un modèle, disons, démocratique. Alors, évidemment, dans la réalité, l'Occident, on le sait tous, promeut la démocratie en interne, elle ne le fait pas nécessairement dans les faits en externe, et elle se bat à l'externe dans sa politique extérieure sur les mêmes bases finalement que les autres puissances, sur la base de ses intérêts stratégiques. Mais je crois que ce n'est quand même pas tout à fait la même chose en termes de signal et en termes de tendance. Un alignement potentiel fort d'un certain nombre de gouvernements avec la Russie, qu'un alignement ou en tout cas le maintien d'une certaine coopération avec des pays qui sont relativement quand même plus démocratiques. Je crois que c'est une question qu'il est important de se poser parce que par rapport au Sahel et par rapport aux enjeux que nous avons, la réponse à la question sécuritaire, elle ne peut pas passer exclusivement par l'efficacité militaire, elle doit passer aussi par le contrat social, par la discussion politique. Et je reviens au Mali, et ce sera pour terminer. On voit aujourd'hui que cet alignement avec la Russie induit aussi finalement un refus d'un dialogue politique interne. Alors qu'on ne pourra pas sortir de cette crise dans le Sahel de manière générale, je crois, si on a à la tête des États, on a des systèmes politiques, des autorités qui ne sont pas en cohérence avec la majorité des autres acteurs politiques et sociaux. Et là, le fait d'avoir derrière la possibilité de s'adosser à la force militaire de la Russie ou de mercenaires russes, on voit bien que cela induit une forme des comportements de la part des gouvernements qui ne sont pas nécessairement ceux qui sont les plus appropriés pour une sortie de crise. Et cela ramène aussi au point de conclusion de Hans sur aujourd'hui la République centrafricaine et la restriction de l'espace civique. Je vais m'arrêter là et je pense que j'ai aussi été un peu plus long que prévu. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Those very, very interesting points that have been brought up by Gilles Yabi. First of all, in just looking at the overview, is that the war in Ukraine, of course, is not good for Africa. We were in a crisis situation. The trends that Baba showed in the beginning show our food security, for example, is extremely heightened with this war, as are our numerous other crises. And this is coupled with the fact that we are in a very uncertain situation. We are uncertain about the intensity of the conflict, and we are uncertain about how long it is going to last. So that makes crisis management that much more difficult. He then went on to look at the specific case of Mali to draw some conclusions. Mali being a country that has very clearly decided that Russia will be its major strategic partner, politically and militarily. And this opting to partner with Russia has the consequence, of course, of extremely tense relationships with Western countries, and particularly its former major strategic ally, which was France. So we see Mali and France both using disinformation campaigns to try to probably draw public opinion and international opinion towards their own direction, which is extremely unhelpful and does not help to assess, for example, is the military assistance provided by Wagner to the Malian government, is it effective? Very difficult to assess because you don't have facts. A lot of people are being killed. Very difficult to determine, are these really armed groups using terrorist methods, or do they happen to be unarmed civilians who are in the wrong place at the wrong time? This is very, very difficult to assess. Even the arrangement between Mali and Russia is difficult to assess because Russia claims that it does not have soldiers in Mali, but it acknowledges that there are private arrangements between a private company, which would be PCM Wagner, and the Malian government. The Malian government says it does not have a contract with a private company, but is receiving official government assistance from the Russian government. So a lot of lack of transparency and information, which make it very, very difficult to assess the actual situation on the ground and even to evaluate how effective or not this assistance is being. I think Gilles' final point, very important, which was very similar to what was made by Hans de Marie, is that we must think about the political model. What we are seeing is that Russia, which has a non-democratic political model and is also rather well known for human rights violations and abuse, the alliance with these struggling governments, because these are governments that are struggling to have control of their national territory, they are struggling to provide even the most basic services for citizens. They're coming out of conflict, armed conflict situations. The tendency has been for the government to be strengthened because on a security level, but that strength has had the result that these governments are not holding social dialogue, are actually reducing political and civic space for other actors, and therefore are not addressing the underlying causes that brought about conflict to begin with. So it's a very tenuous situation in terms of rebuilding peace, in terms of really bringing an end to conflict, because for both experts, there is a need to have in-depth, frank dialogue with all of the parties concerned in order to build a new social contract if you want to get out of the conflict sustainably. Thank you very much, Gilles. And I think it's a perfect segue for Amina Jourdet. Amina is a researcher, as we said, at the University of Ngaoundéré. And I was intrigued when I saw elements of her work that showed her research on grassroots approaches to peace building, some of them which are based on our traditions and our history. And Amina, it looks like exactly what you are addressing is what we are not addressing in these big geopolitical arms negotiations and so on and so forth. You have the floor to tell us a little bit about these approaches, possible ways out that we are not really looking at right now as a continent.
Thank you, Madam Kawala, for giving me the floor. Good evening to everyone. It's an honor for me to be with you. It's an honor for me to be invited here to present some of my finding. And it's also an honor to meet the other experts. Here, I already knew them by their works. It's great for me to know them, to have their pictures and to talk with them and share a panel with them. So my intervention is based not on to deal with this global challenge coming from the conflict, Ukraine and Ukraine conflicts, but to look out how this conflict can be an opportunity to the continent, to African continent, to valorize their own way, own mechanism to build peace and to resolve some conflicts. So my intervention will be based first on what is the top-down resolution conflict. The top-down resolution conflict is an approach features with a systematic downward translation of the conflict solution at each level of the societies. Exactly, it means that the solution of conflicts are designed by a small group of the state top management or political leader of government. That poses a serious risk when it's come that the reconciliation coming from the top, and when it's come to involve people in a political reconciliation project where they do not recognize themselves. Often also refer as a command and control approaches, the top-down conflict resolution generally remain with this at the top and is rarely focused on grassroots realities or local turn challenge. So what is grassroots conflict resolution? The grassroots resolution, conflict resolution, or the indigenous approach to peace building refers to practice and beliefs on peacemaking produced by community-based community early, and which become customary and is still used as the present day. These majorities of this indigenous mechanism of peace building emerge from the local or the indigenous religion, which have been transformed as custom with formal recognition and cultural codification. So this local way to build peace used to sustain intercommunal relation and social harmony between communities and are shared and practiced across generations. In the case of Africa, indigenous approach to peace building are heterogeneous and various across the communities, culture, and context. In this vein, central actors of this indigenous approach to peace building are indigenous people, which include traditional chiefs, elected clan elder, maybe women or men, traditional priests, maybe women or women, and some cultural elites. And also the world communities member closely involved in the conflict is also usually part of the process. Historically, the aim to restore this local mechanism to build peace, aim to restore peace and maintain harmony between people, communities, land, and neighborhood in conflict, with no reference to the what I call modern, most of the time the westernized approaches to build peace. However, it's emerged from my findings that most of the time during peace mediation, these indigenous actors are marginalized. So what are the criteria of which characterize indigenous mechanism of peace building? Through my finding, they are grounded in the local culture. They are difficult to be performed inside another community. So to resolve this problem, the performance of indigenous approach to peace building needs to be adaptive. It signifies that a peace building strategy should be operationalized according to the local turn, cultural and socio-political realities of this society, where peace must be built. In conformity with the Peacebuilding Commission, the PBC, gender strategy in forward to the UN 30 and 25 WPS agenda, indigenous peace building is exclusive. It means that peace operations include the whole part of the society and are accepted by the whole people. To be efficient, the traditional mechanism or the indigenous, I prefer the indigenous mechanism, is more valorized like that, needs to be involved in a democratic mode of governance. Originally, many African communities were governing through social consensus. It means that these communities experiment in their culture, the governance, the democratic governance, or the governance as a tradition of local democracy, where people are directly or indirectly involved in state affairs. So it permitted that all citizens to be concerned with peace affairs. Regarding these criteria, how can women be involved in peace affairs or in conflict resolution in Africa? So the particularity of indigenous approach to build peace is that they capture the complexity of the process for building peace is one African local context. My finding demonstrates that these indigenous beliefs and cultures of peace works because there is a correlation between peace ritual performance and peace building. It is observed that each time peace ritual is performed, conflicts are ended and peace is restored. I can take some example through the Baya society. The Baya society or Baya community are these people who inhabit in the east of Cameroon, a part of the Adamawa region of Cameroon, and another part of Central African Republic. So In the Baya community, there are some ritual called the Sorigamo ritual. The Sorigamo ritual is performed by women of peace, locally called the Okogamo, or women peace tower. These arch and well-respected women use the Sorigamo ritual to build peace in their community. The Sorigamo ritual is a Baya indigenous institution of peace based on a complex ritual with a tree of peace locally called Sori. So here are some examples through history which demonstrate that this correlation is working. First, during the German colonization, so around 1994, the administrator ordered the performance of the Sorigamo ritual. The German administrator ordered the performance of the Sorigamo ritual to end conflict between two villages, Garwabulai and Bidiba. Garwabulai is a town around a frontier with the Central African region, and Bidiba is another town near neighborhood of Garwabulai. Also in 1992, following the ethnic conflicts between the Baya and the Fulani, the local authorities supported the Baya, the Cameroonian, supported by the Cameroonian central government, asked to the Baya, led by a women towers peace thrower, Koko Didi, to perform a Sorigamo ritual to end peace and to restore harmony between the two communities. Recently, Women of Peace for Cameroon and Central Africa perform a ritual to bring back some cohesion between local population and Central African Republic refugees in Garwabulai. So it's on that each time women perform this ritual, each time peace is restored. The second case is based on the Women of Peace Corps of Cameroon, called the Takumben or the Takemben. I don't know if I pronounce well. The Takumben is an indigenous women's secret society institution, widely traditional female power and authority within a Mancon Fondom. The fund is chieftaincy of the Cameroon Grassroots. These women of peace usually advocate issues for governance, human rights, and peace building. Some example is here presented. In the spotlight during Cameroon's troubled transition to multi-party policies and in the early 19th years, the Takumben used their mystical power to check an excessive from the government. They also use the technique of shaming as a strategy in pressing for political freedom and change. This strategy is shaming consists of a next public protest with a traditional plan in their hand. This traditional plan is locally called Keng. So this traditional plan is a symbol of peace. In this vein, during the 1992 years, the Takumben protest in the street of Bamenda to shame soldiers in charge to brutalize population or protesters. This act, culturally considered as a sign of bad luck, has justified why the army or the soldier refused to shoot on protesters and refused to brutalize population. In the Cameroon grassland, sometimes during herder-farm conflicts, the Takumben also used to mobilize into the action to challenge the encroachment of cult on their farmland by the Fulani herdmen. Recently, the Takumben advocates through the world for the restoration to end conflict at the permit me this expression, English part of Cameroon, and the restoration of the peace in this part of Cameroon. The document also used the transnational network to foster political solidarity and inclusion and national aspiration in Cameroon. So,
I mean, can I, I hate to cut you off because this is extremely interesting, but we just have a total of about 10 minutes left. Can I ask you to just round up in about 15 minutes? And then we can have one or two questions before we close up.
Yeah. Okay, it's the list. So give me 2 words to end with this recommendation. The African states should first, with this example, should first legitimize indigenous approach to peace building through legislation in parliament. Secondly, those indigenous institutions of peace which aim at women as the main actors of peace should be encouraged and promoted. Third, African states should develop their national strategic plan of application of the 30 and 25 the WPS of the UN, so we can localize our way to resolve conflict in our continent. Thank you too much.
Thank you very, very much. For those, I think it's really important as we have this global conversation and we are talking about Ukraine, which is very far away and so on, to keep remembering that if we are going to rebuild in Africa, we have to do better than we've done so far. And you have said, one, first of all, that these indigenous approaches to peace building have been present throughout history. You've given some examples which are just in the last 5 years that they have been used. Two is that they are adapted to the local communities because they take into account their history, the origins of the conflict, and the actors which are grounded within that community and which have the ability either to keep a conflict going or to bring it to an end. You've mentioned that in many of the peace rituals, traditionally, women are at the center. They are leading the peace rituals. And this is very important because as we look at rebuilding from conflict, we see very, very few women actually involved, despite the WPS, despite 1325 and 1,000,001 seminars on women and peace building, but still in the actual negotiations and conversations, we see very few women. And as we are looking at this post-crisis situation, it's time to think differently, to legitimize these strategies, you have said, to make them a part of the official peace building process, and to have the actors that are women really play a central role. Let me go to questions. There are a good number of questions in the chat. I will take one question that will perhaps go to all of you as experts. The international structures, UN, I would add in IMF and World Bank, they have clearly failed Africa for a long time. I mean, the examples that Hans de Marie, you gave of how even Central Africa Republic came to be so open to a partnership with Russia. We are seeing now in this moment that these institutions are they're struggling to really be able to provide a response to Ukraine. I think that there's going to be rethinking of these institutions, that the work will be done to say, how do we reorganize ourselves as a world? How do we define structures that can help us to hold countries to the principles and values that they sign on to in these big charters and so on. And my question to both, to all three of you would be, because that would mean including what Amina Jude is talking about, that is having peace building mechanisms that really include grassroots processes. What should Africa be asking for in this moment from international institutions? What should we be bringing to the table in terms of thinking, so that if we come out of this crisis and we have modified these institutions, what do we do? What do we say so that they are responding more to our needs and we are actually getting some solutions from them? Let me start with you, Hans de Marie.
Well, it is indeed an interesting question, but I'm not absolutely sure that I do have an accurate answer. Look, I'll try to speak a little bit vaguely, but the first thing that I will say is that I do believe that we need first to know what we want. That's very important, and that means in terms of how we define our whole agenda as African in the world, that is defined through our values and our political model, economic model. And having said that, that does not mean that Africans in general do have or must singularize themselves or trying to think that their values is are always specific or differentiate from the rest of the world in the world. But I think we definitely need to avoid being embarked in the kind of propaganda, whether it is coming from the West or from Russian side, because we kind of acknowledge easily the propaganda coming from Russian side, but we seem more permissible or tolerant to propaganda coming as well from the West. So we need definitely to be able to figure out what is true in what is being proposed to each of us. And secondly, I think we need to listen to ourselves. Perhaps it's ICG which has pushed me to always think from a country-based approach. But if I go back to Central African Republic, it is important, if you like to solve this country, to definitely request the opinion of Central African citizens. And this is very, very, very important, and to be able to unpack the opinion from people in the capital, to the opinion of people in the provinces, and even in the provinces, differentiate between the opinion of those in the northeastern part, for example, and the opinion of those in the western part, for example, which is, I would not say more developed, is, let's say, less underdeveloped compared to the northeastern part. So this is very important, and I'm saying that because sometimes when some of us think something, people immediately believe that they think it because they are being manipulated or because they are exposed to propaganda, and therefore some Africans are being denied the agency, so the ability to define themselves, to think by themselves, and to themselves generate the views of the world and of the society. So I suspect my answer, of course, will not be helpful, but what I could just say is that I insist on the ability to, yes, to self-differentiate and to figure out if at the end of it, what we end up as will and decision is exactly what is being proposed to us. It could be the case, actually. It could be the case that actually after self-thinking, we realize that, oh, what is being proposed to us is actually what is right. But we need to take the time to think ourselves internally and say, okay, this is saying that other person is saying this other version. What is really, really for us and for the citizen? And of course, I'm aware that when I say the citizen is a very holistic word, and that in the citizen, there are different categories: the young, the men, the women, the poor, the rich, and that all that has to be taken into account in whichever policy that we will self-design. But I insist that at least the solutions have to be internally generated, and from what I've been seeing now is not the case. And part of what Christelle Amina has alluded to and magnificently developed, I don't know, it should be explored and see how it could be applicable to different contexts, taking into account the particularities of those contexts.
Yeah. Thank you, Hans-Marie. It's not it's not vague at all. I think that, you know, every crisis is opportunity. The world is thinking already and moving already, and really all of us in Africa, it's part of what motivated us also to start these talks, is that, you know, we have to be thinking. This is a huge opportunity for us to rethink and to review, and we still have to figure out how we get these citizens to the table that seem to have been grabbed by, you know, captured by governments alone. But definitely this is a point. Let me go to Giliabi. We are at 5:32. Please, if you can give us like 10 more minutes just on this last point so that we round up. Mr. Yabi?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I will respond directly in English. Actually, maybe not specifically on the question that you raised, but also I look at some of the question in the chat, and I would like maybe to make just 4 comments. One is about, I think, political models and the values. Hans also mentioned that. I think we do need to define our values and to define the political system that are consistent with the values that we think we have in Africa. But I think we need to be explicit about that, because I used to hear from a lot of Africans that we need to build endogenous political models based on our values. But I generally don't really hear, you know, specifically about what kind of values that we are talking about. And, you know, if we can't define them very clearly, we cannot really build a political system around it. And I think we need to be clear about that. Second thing, on the complexity of the world, I think, again, that this crisis is showing how complex the world is. And also, it is extremely uncertain. As I said before, we need to anticipate also some of the implications that are not obvious right now. And including the international institution will change after this crisis in terms of balance of power, in terms of multilateralism. And I think, again, there is a temptation to think that we might be better off with a system where we have more bilateral cooperation and no multilateral organization or multilateral rules. I'm not sure that for small, weak countries, it is good not to have a multilateral world, because it means, you know, again, rapport de force will prevail. I'm not sure that that will be very good for the continent. Third, and important point that I did not mention when I was talking about Mali is the risk for regional integration. When we have polarization, it means also that we are seeing divide within the continent, within even a region like West Africa, within ECOWAS. The situation in Mali right now is also a threat to regional integration. And I'm not sure, again, that the rivalry between external powers, you know, we should allow it to destroy, actually, to lead to setbacks in our regional integration progress. And my last point is about knowledge. Of course, I think that we do need to continue to invest in knowledge creation, in education, think tanks, informed debates, because we do need, again, to articulate our own positions in a world which is not only complex, but it's going to be more and more dangerous.
Great, thank you so much, Liabi. Yes, absolutely. In this moment, we have to be so careful. You know, I was saying to somebody that, you know, oppression, which we had through colonization, is a terrible thing. If somebody has, you know, raped you, stolen from you, killed you, you likely have such a strong dislike for that person that even when they're saying something good, you are like, you know, which makes sense. But we have to be careful not to define ourselves in opposition to our former oppressor. I think that's what both of you are saying, is that we have to look at, yes, look at our history, look at what is being offered to us, and somehow go define for ourselves what makes historical sense, cultural sense, but also strategic sense in this moment, looking forward. Dr. Julde, it looks like we are all saying we have to come back to what you have been talking about, because definitely that is a part of the knowledge, that it's definitely a part of what we have to be looking at, is what we ourselves did historically, traditionally, culturally, to be inclusive. Today we say we need social dialogue, we need inclusion, and so on, and we find that there were traditional mechanisms for inclusion. Do you have like a last sentence, a last word before we close out?
Yes, thank you, Madam Kawala. Thank you too much. Africa has something to bring on the table for your other experience. You know, the Gagasa in Rwanda is a model of justice and reconciliation after the genocide. After the apartheid, South Africa invent a model based on the tradition to reconcile some people. And also we have many practices through the continent. And during the year 2020, FemWise Africa invite me as a key expert to produce some recommendation to African Union peace policymakers to develop global, regional, and sub-regional policies and indigenous conflict resolution approach to that incorporate diversity across continent and continent. We see during the years 19, African countries develop a model of reconciliation between the government and the population. In French, they call it Conférence Nationale Souveraine. I don't know how it is called in French. It's inspired by the Arbre à Palabre coming from our own society. So my advocacy now is that we researchers, we should be more interested in our roots, way mechanism to build peace and transform it as a political project to bring something coming from the continent and be a role model to the world. Thank you too much.
Thank you so much. This is such an inspiring conversation. You know, we live in a continent that can get you down, but I think this is a really inspiring conversation. I love the way the three of you are concurring at the end, and you are concurring to say we must have our own political project. We must learn from others. We cannot be trapped in history. We cannot also just be ping-ponged between this historical master and now we just look for a new master without looking at what we ourselves can develop, what we have developed in the past. And it also leads me to believe that the thinking that we are doing at Strategies right now with regard to the functional state in Africa, what does it mean to have a functional state? What does it mean to have a state where citizens identify with the state and believe in the state, such that there is not an attraction by armed groups and extremist groups because the state has not delivered? And how do we move from where we are to actually build these functional states that will work on political projects? You need a minimum amount of functionality to work on a political project, to build social inclusion, to be able to influence the international agenda. We are very, very far from it now, but what is clear from this conversation is that we have so many minds, we have so many people who are already thinking about it in so many different instances. Here we have a university researcher, we have somebody working in an international organization, we have a citizen, African citizen think tank represented, and all of this is hosted by an African company based. So it means that in all of our different platforms, we are thinking about this, and I think it gives us hope. I'm going to end here. We could continue, but there are agendas. I'm going to end here, and I'm going to invite you to just be aware for our final talk in this round on the functional state. How do we ensure that the state is present? How do we ensure that it delivers basic services? How do we ensure that it builds the sustainability, which can only be built through inclusion, through a common shared principles and values that we are talking about? And how do we navigate that in this very, very complex and dangerous world, you have said it, that we live in today? Thank you so much, everybody, for taking your time and your energy. A huge thanks to our experts. Yes, please do put on your cameras so that we see you for before we go. It was a real pleasure to discuss with all of you. Thank you so much to all those in the audience with lots of lovely questions. If the experts are okay, some people are asking for your contact information. We will direct those people directly to you via email so that the discussion can continue. Thanks a lot, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thanks.